Coming up in this week's episode, children do not need you never to get it wrong. They need to see what it looks like when someone who loves them takes accountability and then behaves differently. Welcome to The Liberation Effect with me, your host, Helen. Hello and welcome to The Liberation Effect. Today I want to talk about parenting after trauma. Specifically about the traps we fall into when we're desperately trying to be nothing like the people who hurt us. It's a subject that comes up frequently on my socials, guests on the podcast, and of course on The Hub, my recovery membership platform. So I'm going to answer the most kind of common questions here. Those traps are things like rescuing our children from every uncomfortable emotion, projecting our own childhood pain onto them, giving them everything we needed instead of what they actually need, being terrified of becoming our abusive or toxic parent, and then, of course, what to do when our child is angry with us or pushes us away. Because if we're parenting after trauma, there is one hard truth that we really need to start with. Our children are not here to heal our wounds. They are not a second chance at our childhood. We are the adults now, which means, of course, the work is ours. In this episode, I'm going to take you through 3 big questions. Why is parenting after trauma so hard, even when we're trying our absolute best? How do I know I'm not becoming my abusive or toxic parent? And how do I stay the reliable adult when my child is angry, upset, or rejecting me? Let's start with the first. So, why is parenting after trauma so hard? I have a question here that maybe narrows that down a little bit. Why do I panic when my child has big feelings, in inverted commas, for those not watching on YouTube? If you grew up in a home where your feelings were punished, mocked, or ignored, your nervous system learned a very, very clear and important lesson. Big feelings are dangerous. They are threatening. They get you in trouble. They get you humiliated, exiled, excluded, ignored, and invalidated. So now, when your child tries, rages, sulks, or melts down, or does anything, in fact, that you would have got in trouble for, or any of those other experiences I've described, it does not just register as my child is in distress. Your body often responds as if you're back in your own childhood. You're triggered. Suddenly you may feel a rush of panic, shame, anger, or even rage, not because your child is doing anything wrong, but because your body remembers what used to happen when emotions appeared. There are 2 very common responses to that. You shut them down because you feel overwhelmed, whether through ignoring or anger, or you rescue them from the feeling immediately because you cannot tolerate their distress. Neither of those responses makes you a monster. Be very, very clear about it. It makes you someone whose nervous system is traumatized and trying to keep you safe. But it does mean you'll need to do things more deliberately, not just instinctively. So, how do you know if you're experiencing this? Think back to a time your child was distressed. How old did you feel in the face of their emotions? If the answer is young, maybe under 10, 15, or 20, then it's likely that you're triggered by their emotions, because as I said, it's something you would have been punished for in one way or another. The key thing to remember is when your child is distressed and you feel that familiar internal alarm, the first job is not to fix the child. The first job is to steady yourself. That might look like, noticing to yourself, my heart is racing, my jaw is tight, I feel young, I feel like I'm in trouble or in danger. Taking a breath and planting your feet really firmly on the ground, literally reminding yourself, this is my child, I'm not back there, I am the adult now. Using a simple phrase in your head, big feelings are allowed, we can survive this. You'll not do this perfectly, and you're not supposed to. The goal is not to be perfectly calm or a perfectly trauma-free robot who wants a robot parent? That would be awful. But the goal is actually to interrupt the old pattern enough that your child gets a different experience to the one that you had. The very difficult truth about this is that when you shut down the feelings, you're communicating the same message you had. The pendulum may have swung the other way, but it provides the same outcome. The message that feelings are not okay and bad feelings are rejected. That results in a child being unable to connect with, acknowledge, and process difficult feelings, which of course won't be good for them, both short and long term. And I might add, or anybody else for that matter. It might help to have this saying kind of somewhere, big feelings are allowed, we can survive this. It might help to have that somewhere you can clearly see it on in those moments, on your wall maybe, or your phone lock screen, and so on. I also really recommend practicing this to kind of embed the rewiring. In the actual moment, when you're faced with those moments, with these emotions, it can be really difficult not to act from the triggered space. You need to find the kind of pause between event and action to make conscious decisions in your responses. Your amygdala fires to tell you danger, danger, threat, threat, respond from here. And you need to give it the time to get to your prefrontal cortex where your logic can take over and make conscious decisions. So, by thinking back to a time where your child was distressed and noticing what your physical responses were and then your reaction, you can kind of identify the cues physically that show that you're triggered and therefore interrupt the pattern. Question 2 around this subject. Am I rescuing them from feelings or supporting them with them? Many traumatized parents confuse support with rescue. Support says, I know this feels awful, I'm here. I believe you can survive your feelings and I will stay with you while you do. Rescue, however, says, make it stop now. I cannot cope with your distress, so I will do anything to make these feelings disappear immediately. Support is about helping the child through the distress. Rescue is largely about the parent's discomfort and disempowers the child from knowing they can survive difficult things. Examples of rescue might be things like, immediately giving them a treat whenever they're sad so they never sit with that sadness. Maybe it would be cancelling every boundary. You immediately say, oh, it's fine, we can go and do the thing, just because they're crying or they're upset or they're disappointed. And maybe it's even rushing in with solutions without allowing them to feel upset, frustrated, or disappointed first. Actually, rushing in with solutions before they've even had an opportunity to think of those solutions themselves, asking them, what would you like to do about it, rather than telling them what to do about it. Kind of over-explaining and over-apologising might be another sign in order to calm them down, because their anger makes you feel like a bad parent. Again, I just want to make it really clear. If you see yourself in this, it's not a reason to drown in shame. This is information. Rescue tells you that your nervous system has not yet learned that feelings can be survived. You did not know what you do not know, right? And now you know it, and now you can practice it. Do not judge previous you with current you's knowledge. It is not fair on either of you. A healthier approach might look like, I can see you feel really disappointed that we're not going to the park. It's okay to be angry about that, and we're still not going. It might be, I know it's hard when your friend says they do not want to play. It really hurts. Do you want a hug or some space? It makes sense that you're upset. In doing these responses, giving these responses, you're allowing the feeling without abandoning the boundary. That's the bit that many of us never had. Our parents either removed the boundary altogether and made their lives easier, or kept the boundary but removed the connection, or potentially went into victim mode asking you to rescue them, or punished you for having a reaction to the situation in the first place. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is center the child and give them safety in their feelings. We're telling them it's okay to have these feelings, you will be okay, and letting them go through them to find their own path, but also know that they have support and do not need to do it alone. There is, of course, nuance in this too. It's very important that you help your child regulate the emotion too. Children are a lot more emotionally intelligent than we often give them credit for. If they see that their emotions might provoke a certain response, they learn to use it potentially for their gain. And this is not the same as being manipulative. It's influence, it's safety, it's agency in the small amount of agency that children have. So it might be that if crying or having a tantrum resulted in you giving in, it will potentially take some repetition. And sorry, I'm talking about in the past with you giving in. But it might be that because that pattern has been established, it may take a bit of repetition in holding the boundary before they accept it no longer works. So staying really firm in that boundary, regardless of how much the behaviour escalates, is vital. And another really important point, there may be a point where comfort is no longer appropriate. And I know, I can hear everyone going, and this will feel very, very difficult if you were abandoned in your emotions lot. But it's not the same thing. To validate, offer comfort, and hold the boundary is important. But when the behaviour escalates or continues for so long that it's beyond what is maybe appropriate or actually authentic and genuine, there is a point at which saying something like, I understand you're upset, but this is not an appropriate way to behave. If you need something to help you feel better, tell me and we can work on it together. And when it comes to physical or verbal attacks from a child, that is a non-starter. Telling the child that they can be upset without those attacks is important. Disengaging once that has been said is key not to rewarding unacceptable behaviour. Reward, when I talk about reward, is not a positive thing that they get out of it. Any kind of interaction at this point would be reward. Any kind of validation would be reward. It is not that it's reward in the form of a sweet or a boundary drop or praise or a cuddle or whatever it might be, and the kind of idea of pleasant things. It's reward as in the behaviour gets a reaction of some description that shows them they have power and influence over the situation. So, going back to this, validation doesn't also mean tolerance. You make it really clear that if it continues, you will leave the room, and if it does, you leave, you follow through. One further caveat for all my fellow parents of autism particularly, but any kind of neurodivergence, if those are involved, you may well be dealing with a meltdown rather than a tantrum, and there is a big difference. In fact, I get quite frustrated when people refer to tantrums as meltdowns. And the reason is this, that meltdowns will continue whether someone is observing or not. The child will take themselves off to their room and the behaviour continues, the meltdown continues. Also, that meltdowns can be internal as well as external. Shutdown can be a meltdown. So, meltdowns continue whether someone is observing or not, and however, tantrums dissipate. Even learning how to regulate meltdowns, though, is important for a child to do. Using things like grounding techniques or distractions can help break a meltdown cycle, because I don't know about you, but if you have noticed that sometimes the child or autistic person might get stuck in a kind of loop where they almost can't break out of it themselves, it's really difficult in those moments to know what to do as the parent. And the greatest thing that personally I have found in terms of that is to do something ludicrous, to do a silly dance or make a silly face or noise or whatever, or what was that noise? And it just stops the brain in the pattern of meltdown thinking and reaction and behaviour. So the other side again, of course, is that sometimes a meltdown is very important for the autistic person to be allowed, but putting firm boundaries and ground rules around them when the child is regulated, of course, is key to managing them safely. In our house, the rule is you cannot hurt yourself or anyone else, and anything you break won't be fixed. It works really, really well for us. And of course, you find your own. And, with those boundaries and rules in place, it's led to meltdowns being manageable and, as they've got older, self-managed too. The children both know, when they are starting to feel like they might need a meltdown or be on the edge of one, what to do about it. And that might be that they take themselves off to a quiet space, or it might be that they allow the meltdown for themselves. And that is okay. Big feelings are okay. We will survive them. Okay, so your job isn't to stop your child feeling the way they do or to make them stop by giving in. Your job is to hold connection and boundary at the same time. And that is what safety feels like. One very final note on this subject. Often we can try and stop the behaviour because we're embarrassed about what other people might think or say, especially if you've had a toxic parent in your life who has been critical of your child's meltdowns or tantrums or behaviour. They are learning to be human. They are learning how to exist, and they are learning to regulate big feelings. So if you are worried about what people might think or say, sod them. If anyone is judging you for supporting your child through difficult feelings and experiences while still holding a boundary, that is about them, not you. If they're a stranger, ask yourself why you care. And if there's someone you know, ask yourself, why is someone in my life being judgmental rather than supportive? Do they deserve to be there? Perhaps not. So, the third question under this umbrella is, am I giving them what I needed or what they need? Another trap after trauma is what I call reparative overcompensation. It's a bit of a mouthful, really, but you know exactly what hurt you, so you become determined that your child will never experience anything even vaguely resembles it. If you grew up with financial scarcity, for example, you may overbuy, give extra presents when maybe they're not needed. If you grew up emotionally neglected, you may overtalk, overexplain, overshare, or potentially over-intrude. If you grew up with harsh discipline, you may avoid any discipline at all. The intention is good. You're trying to repair what was done to you by doing the opposite for your child. In fact, go further and say you're trying to prevent your child ever feeling the way you did. And the problem with that is that your child is not you, of course. They have a completely different temperament, different needs, different nervous system. In fact, they're having a completely different childhood. They haven't got that person that did it to you. They are having a whole different experience where you are present, you are attuned, you are listening, watching, and interested and engaged. So they don't have the wounds you do. Things that bothered you won't bother them the same way. So when you automatically give them what you would have needed, you risk actually missing who they are. You miss what they need. So here are some examples. For example, you hated being alone as a child, so you insist your child is involved in absolutely everything. However, they may be introverted and desperate for quiet. You were maybe never allowed to express an opinion, so you invite constant negotiation on every decision. Your child, meanwhile, actually feels safer with firmer, clearer leadership, because that onus of responsibility on making decisions for themselves, yes, some, but really it should be about the colour of their shoes, trousers, t-shirt, whatever it might be, rather than what restaurant you go to or where you should go on holiday this year. Some things need to be dictated, whereas other things need to be chosen. And what you need to do as the parent in that situation is find the place of happy medium. Think about what would be appropriate for a child outside of this experience to make decisions about, and then go from there. Really tricky. If you can bounce it off somebody, that would also be really, really helpful. So Another place might be that you grew up with parents who never bought anything unnecessary. So you shower your child with toys and experiences. Your child feels overwhelmed, overstimulated, and struggles with gratitude and regulation, which in turn then disappoints you because they're taking everything for granted. But actually, they're not. They're just taking it as it's come. It's a really tricky space, but the invitation here is to pause and ask a very simple question. Am I responding to my child, or am I responding to my inner child? You can absolutely notice where you are healing your story and still shift to meet your child as a separate human being. And there's a grief in that too. When you see your child getting a childhood you could only have dreamt of, and you're the one giving it, and how easy that is to do. Huge, huge grief. Okay, a practical way to do this might be observe who they actually are, what soothes them, what stresses them, what lights them up, perhaps. Ask them directly, age appropriately, what they like, what they dislike, and what helps. Notice when your reaction is much bigger than the situation, which is usually a sign that your history is in the room. And you are allowed to feel that grief. You are allowed to grieve what you did not have. And you are also required to parent the child in front of you, not the child that you were. Right. Let's move on to the next kind of umbrella question. How do I know I'm not becoming my abusive or toxic parent? This is one of the most common questions that I hear. You lose your temper, you snap, you say something unkind, and suddenly you're convinced you're turning into the very, very person that you swore you would never, ever be. So let's be very, very clear. Being human, losing it occasionally, and then feeling awful about it is not the same as being an abusive parent. You know, this is something that was really difficult for me to get hold of. The idea that I could be human, that I didn't have to be perfect, that I could lose my temper and apologize, and most importantly, repair. I could model accountability. I could model apology. That was hard, but my goodness me, what it shows, or how it shows up in my children, is that they are able, largely, not always, to accept accountability, responsibility, or make mistakes without fear of who they are as people, their worth and their value. Mistakes are learning in our house, and that is something I never would have experienced. So anyway, going back to this point, abuse is not about one-off mistakes. Abuse is a pattern of behavior supported by entitlement, denial, and lack of repair. You know, let's break that down through a few questions again. So the first one would be, what actually made my parent abusive or toxic? Well, abusive or toxic parent is characterized by things like chronic emotional invalidation, criticism, shaming, using fear, humiliation, or withdrawal of love to control behavior, making the child responsible for the parent's emotions or comfort, refusal to take accountability or repair when they hurt the child, prioritizing their image, their feelings, or their convenience over their child's well-being consistently, because there again is the thing, consistently. Along with that word consistently, chronic is a key word. Those two words are absolutely vital to understanding what characterizes the abuse. Your abusive parent didn't just have a bad day and snap occasionally. This was literally the air that you breathed. You were always surrounded by it. So when you have a moment of regret, the question is not, have I ever done something my parent did? The question is, am I building a system where this is normal, or am I treating it as a problem to be addressed? This is something that's really important actually to say at this point. There is a bit of a myth that if you worry about the idea that you're a toxic parent, you're not a toxic or abusive parent. That is not true. Abusive and toxic parents would wonder and think and consider whether or not, possibly even worry about it. But what they won't do is go, actually, yeah, this thing I do here is problematic and I probably need to change it. They will justify every single behavior and everything and find excuses and reasons for why what they have done is okay. You, however, are feeling guilty, showing you that you have acted beyond your morals and value system, and you are looking to take accountability and repair. It is difficult, especially when you were told to be perfect all the time, but it is vital. So remember that you are not your toxic parent if you are reflecting on your behavior and how you can change it for your child's well-being. You may be if you look at your behavior and then justify every single thing that you know is questionable in terms of toxicity or abuse. So the next question under this umbrella would be, how can I check my reality when I'm afraid I am just like them? Well, when that fear hits, instead of kind of spiraling into shame, run through some honest checkpoints with yourself. Frequency. Is this how I behaved most of the time, or was today an exception? Intent. Was I trying to terrify, belittle, or control, or was I overwhelmed and dysregulated? And the response would be, am I prepared to acknowledge what I did, apologize and change, or do I double down and blame the child? Do you see that? That's the thing that I'm talking about in the difference between toxic and a bad day, okay? The pattern would be, if I zoomed out, you're looking for the pattern. So if you zoom out over the past year, would my child experience me mostly safe, mostly dangerous, or unpredictable? If you recognize that a behavior is harmful and you feel discomfort, guilt, or shame, that's information. It shows you have a functioning conscience, empathy. As I said, an abusive parent tends to justify, minimize, or blame the child rather than feel remorse and move towards change. But that does not mean you get to stay there. Feeling bad is not the repair. It is the starting signal. Okay? It's going back to the apology and the accountability and the change in behavior. So let's move on to the next question, which is, what does repair actually look like with my child? Well, repair is where you demonstrate that you are not your abusive parent. It could sound like maybe, earlier I shouted and that wasn't okay. You did not deserve to be shouted or spoken to like that, Or it could be, I was feeling overwhelmed, but that is not your responsibility. I'm sorry. So we might explain the context, but we're not using it as a way to justify or excuse the behavior. We're still taking accountability. Another one might be, I'm going to work on doing that differently next time. Notice what you're not doing. You are not saying, I'm a terrible parent, I'm useless, you must hate me, and making your child comfort you, because that's what you do in those moments. You center yourself and you ask them to rescue you. You are not saying, well, if you just behaved, I would not have to shout. You are not pretending it did not happen. You name the behavior, own it, apologize and change. Children do not need you never to get it wrong. They need to see what it looks like when someone who loves them takes accountability and then behaves differently. That is how you break the cycle. I hate the word cycle. I always think of it as a chain. We're not in a cycle. We're in a chain of trauma being passed down. But regardless, that is how you break the chain. If you're scared of rejection, of saying no, have no idea how to trust people, you're not alone, and you don't have to heal alone either. That's what the Hub is for. It's a membership community designed for survivors just like you. Every month, we dive into powerful courses, we hold live calls, and connect in a supportive, understanding space so you can break free from the past and build healthy, fulfilling relationships. Maybe it's time to stop surviving and instead start thriving. Visit jointhehub.ac today using the code POD20 to get £20 off your first month's membership. I can't wait to see you there. Take care. Bye. And the next question would be, what if I can see I'm repeating some of their patterns? This is the bit many of us do not want to hear. If you can see that you are consistently using control, shame, silent treatment, guilt, or fear, then you are not just a bit like your parent when you are stressed. You're actively repeating harm. You may not be as extreme. You may not be doing what they did to you, but your child is not comparing your behavior to your parent. They're experiencing it directly. If that is you, you need support, therapy, psychoeducation, groups, something that helps you regulate your own nervous system and learn different relational skills. You are responsible for stopping the pattern, not your child. They are not the one who needs to be more understanding of your trauma. You are the one who needs to address it. Compassion for yourself is important, but compassion without accountability just recreates the same damage in a softer voice. We're not doing that, and I, apart from anyone else, will hold you accountable for it. So let's move on to the next umbrella question. Staying the reliable adult when your child is angry, upset, or rejecting you. This is where a lot of traumatized parents really struggle, understandably. If you grew up trying to keep a parent happy so you did not get hurt, your child being angry with you can feel intolerable. Or if you have rejection sensitivity, not dysphoria, because that is not a thing, please see my socials or my channel with Dr. Paul on YouTube where we talk about this. But if you have a heightened sensitivity to rejection, your child being angry with you, rejecting you, can just feel awful. It can trigger thoughts like, I'm the worst parent, or they hate me, I've ruined absolutely everything, I'm being abused now. This is exactly what my parent did to me. When those beliefs kick in, it's very easy to do one of two things. You make it all about you, and you demand your child makes you feel better. You collapse into guilt and start negotiating your boundaries away. Neither of those responses is you being the reliable adult. Let's go through some specific questions here again. So, number one would be, what does it mean to not center myself when my child is upset? Well, not centering yourself, and we've talked about it already a little bit, means that your child's emotional experience in that moment is about them, not about your history, identity, or your need for reassurance. Centering yourself might look like, do you know how much I do for you? And this is how you treat me? You sound just like your grandfather or grandmother. Or, I was never allowed to speak to my parents like that. You are so lucky. I cannot believe you speak to me in that way. Crying in front of them in a way that makes them feel responsible for your feelings. I actually remember seeing a TikTok about a woman who was in her car having a panic attack, and her 5-year-old was regulating and grounding her and helping her with her breathing. And everybody in the comments was, oh my God, it's so sweet, it's so sweet. But our lot, and I know it was our lot because I know we all know about these sorts of things, was saying this is inappropriate. And it was. A 5-year-old should not be regulating their parent. I understand things are hard and people have difficult moments, but it is not your job. It's not their job to make you safe for them, because that is what they would be doing. If you are in that situation where you're crying or having a panic attack or anxious or whatever it might be, you let them know that even though that is happening, you will be okay, that you just need a moment for the feelings to pass, that feelings are okay and safe. There was a bereavement in our family a while ago, and I remember my oldest, who was actually quite young at the time, seeing me cry, probably for the first time in a quite significant way, and me saying, darling, this is normal, but it's okay. It's good to let it out, but I will be okay. And that was all they needed to hear. They didn't rescue me, and I didn't ask them to. And what it showed was these feelings are absolutely normal and accepted in our family, and it's important that you let them out and that somebody will be there for you should you need them to be. So there's a sort of difficult nuance in it, but the point being that you are not asking them to make you feel better about hurting them, right? Anyway, so another way we center ourselves is by turning their perfectly normal anger into a debate about whether you are a good enough parent. Instead of that, you could stay calm enough to sort of name what's happening. You're very angry with me right now. I get it. but you hold the boundary. You're allowed to be angry. You are not allowed to call me names, hit, or break things. Acknowledge their perspective without surrendering your role. From your point of view, this feels really unfair. I hear that. And I'm still saying no to the party. In that moment, your job is not to be understood or forgiven or seen as the good parent. Your job is to be the parent, the reliable adult who can survive being disliked for a bit. It's totally okay. They're allowed to reject you. They are allowed to leave without guilt and return without punishment, right? Okay, so moving on. The next question is, how do I hold a boundary without shaming them? A lot of traumatized parents only saw two models of response growing up. Model 1 would be harsh, shaming, frightening. 2, no boundaries at all. Or maybe it would be a mix of the two. But either way, now when you try to hold a boundary, it can feel like your only tools are the ones that you were given, which are largely or were largely shame and fear. So let's be concrete. Shaming boundaries look like you're so selfish you never think of anyone else. No wonder you have no friends if you behave like this. Oh, triggering myself in that. I cannot believe I raised someone who acts like this. Maybe I should have done a bingo card to go with this episode, but there we are. Anyway, firm, non-shaming boundary would look like, I'm not willing to be spoken to like that. If you continue, I will end the conversation. Looping back to what we were talking about right at the beginning under that first question of saying, there is a limit to how much I will take. I am still a human being, even though I'm your parent. Your feelings are valid, but they do not get to wound me in a really nasty way. Okay? So it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to slam doors or throw things. If it happens again, we will need to take a break and try again later. Or I can hear how disappointed you are. I'm still not changing my mind. The difference is that you are describing behavior, not attacking identity. Here's the thing. You are separating who you are as a whole from what you are currently doing. This is the piece that traumatized children very rarely got. You can dislike a behavior while still being a safe, loving base. And this is the bit that I think is so important for us to both understand for ourselves in our experience, but of what not to do for our children. In that, when we are not enjoying a behavior, when a behavior is one that we do not want to encourage in any way, shape, or form, we do not shame the entire character. We do not say, you are this. We say, this thing you do is not okay, right? We correct the behavior, not the character. And that is the thing that we reject. The behavior, not the character. Okay, so next question would be, what about when they reject me or pull away? Well, this one hits right at the center of unhealed abandonment wounds. Of course it does. And of course it feels terrible. Maybe your child wants the other parent when they're hurt. Or maybe your teenager pulls away, rolls their eyes, oh, familiar, and, tells you to get out of their room. Maybe they're contemptuous about you. Maybe your adult child needs distance to heal from things that happened in the past. If you have unresolved trauma, this can feel like the worst thing that could happen. It might bring all the old pain rushing up, the times you were ignored, discarded, or pushed aside, and trigger the fear that you actually have been that parent that you were so desperate not to be. When that happens, when they push you away, you might be tempted to guilt them. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me. Or maybe chase them, constant texts, calls, demands for reassurance, or that you can't just do this, you can't just cut me off, you need to talk about it. And essentially, those are demands for reassurance, demands for connection. And then the final thing is you might want to retaliate. Fine. If you do not want me, do not come to me when you need something. Again, understandable, but not helpful. You have to remember, as you're listening to this, to hold yourself with this compassion. The blueprint that you were given to parent from was so messed up, and you're trying to undo all the things without knowing which ones were actually good and which ones were bad, if any were good at all. And sometimes there will be good bits. The question is, or the task, I suppose, actually, is to Identify what was good, what you want to take, and leave behind the rest, the things that were harmful. So, understandable but not helpful. Instead, the task is to hold on to 3 truths at once. Their anger, distance, or need for space may be painful, but it is not automatically abandonment, and it's certainly not automatically abuse. You are allowed to have feelings about it, but those feelings are yours to process with other adults, not with the child. A secure parent can survive being temporarily disliked or held accountable. You might say to a younger child, "You're really upset with me and want dad or mum or other caregiver right now. That's okay. They can help you, and I'm still here when you are ready." Or to a teen, you might say, "I can see you need space. I'll respect that. I'm available when you want to talk. I love you." Or to an adult child, particularly in the context of past harm or trauma, "I hear that you need distance at the moment. I will respect that. If you decide you want any kind of contact in the future, I'm open to that and prepared to keep doing my own work." Notice again, you are not begging, guilting, or retaliating. You are making it safe for them to come towards you while accepting that they may not or not yet. And then you go and fall apart with your therapist or your friends, not with them. Children are not here to heal our childhood wounds. I want to end with this because it sits underneath everything we have talked about. If you were traumatized as a child, you absolutely deserved better. You deserved safety, validation, protection, someone who chose you over their own comfort. If you become a parent, that longing does not suddenly disappear. It may, in fact, intensify, because now you can finally see, with adult eyes, how bad it really was. That can create a very powerful temptation to make your child the answer to your pain, to lean on them for emotional support, to look to them for reassurance that you are not like your parent, to take their affection as proof that you are lovable after all, to treat them as the second chance at your own childhood instead of the first chance of theirs. This is where we have to be very, very direct. When you use your child to stabilize your self-esteem, regulate your emotions, or heal your history, you're putting adult work onto a child. And that was exactly what was done to you, even if the content looks different. Your child deserves parents who take their own healing seriously, who uses therapy, friendship, support networks, and self-reflection rather than their children to hold their pain. Your child deserves a parent who can say, "I have trauma and it is not your job to fix it. It's mine." Your job is to be a child. Being a good parent after trauma is not about being endlessly gentle and permissive. It's about being honest, accountable, and committed to change. It's about being willing to say, "What happened to me was not my fault, but what I do now is my responsibility." And it is about remembering always that your child does not need you to be perfect. They need you to be real, safe, and willing to repair. If you recognize yourself in a lot of what I've talked about today, do not use it as evidence that you are hopeless. Use it as a map. Notice where you rescue instead of support. Notice where you repeat patterns instead of challenging them. Then notice where you put your feelings at the center instead of your child's experience. And then, one conversation at a time, begin to do things differently. You'll not get it right every time, but every time you choose repair over defensiveness, accountability over denial, and support over rescue, you are doing something extraordinary. Wow, there we are. That is parenting after trauma. So I would love to hear thoughts, feelings, questions, and comments. Do write in, and if you want to apply to be on the show, you can do so on my website. So, that being said, as ever, all that now remains to be said is take care.